Welcome everyone on behalf of the Spurlock Museum at the University of Illinois. Welcome to this evening's discussion. We would like to begin by recognizing and acknowledging that the museum and the university are on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land grant institution, the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the past 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. My name is Beth Watkins, and I'm the coordinator of the museum's current exhibit, Debates, Decisions, Demands, Objects of Campaigns and Activism. This exhibit uses US political and campaign memorabilia, women's suffrage materials, and a variety of international and historical objects and photographs to look at aspects of personal political participation. The museum is open to the public with free admission, so if you're in the Champaign-Urbana area, we invite you to come visit. Tonight's discussion is part of an ongoing series looking at global films that highlight political activism tying to this exhibit, and we're including documentaries such as this film or feature treatments of true stories like the one we're doing next week about a freedom fighter in India during the British Raj. I am so happy to welcome tonight's feature discussant, Dr. Walenia Silva. Dr. Silva is an associate professor at the music education program at, please forgive my pronunciation, Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais in Brazil. She is also a consultant for the Arena de Cultura, an arts school for the city of Belo Horizonte. Dr. Silva earned her PhD in continuing education at the U of I at Urbana-Champaign. And I wanted to add that I invited her to be our discussant because I first met her over a shared love of sharing culture through music and talking about what arts and expression mean to people in the Champaign-Urbana's premier lesbian feminist chorus, Ama Song, which does a lot of world music, where she was a singer and also brought to our choir and to our community Brazilian music that she had transcribed and led us in learning and performing. So I'm very glad to welcome her this evening. For everyone is welcome to join in the discussion. So if you would like to speak, you can use the raise your hand feature on Zoom or use the Q&A and we can get your questions to Walenia. And tonight's discussion is being recorded and will be available on the museum's YouTube channel after we've had a chance to fix the auto transcriptions, which you can see at the bottom of your screen if you turn on the closed caption function. We know that Zoom auto transcripts will not be perfect for Portuguese words or the English ones really, so we'll clean those up before we publish to YouTube. Again, thank you all for joining us. And Walenia, would you like to begin the discussion?
Thank you so much. Thanks, Beth, for the inviting me in this opportunity to share a little bit of what I know as a Brazilian, my perspective of the movie, and I hope others will join and we can have a good discussion about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm wearing red today. It's not on purpose, but it's the color of the main character in the movie, his party, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, PT, the Workers' Party that he founded in the 80s. Their flag is red with a star. And so I'm wearing red and I just thought it was a good coincidence. The movie is very, in my opinion, very well made because she chose a very important moment when Lula was being arrested. The federal police got a trial and he was condemned, and the footage, the documentary started with him being arrested or getting ready to give himself to be taken by the police. He had to take a plane to go to another state. So just for you to consider a little bit, when I'm traveling, people always ask me, "Are you from São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro?" Because these two are the most well-known cities in Brazil. Lula, he's from the Northeast, a small town way up in the north. But he made the name and his career and his working life in São Paulo. São Paulo is a city that's very industrial. It's the Brazilian heart when it comes to money, when it comes to industries, employment, culture. And Rio de Janeiro is also well known by different aspects. For example, the beaches, the landscaping. It's a beautiful city. It's very touristic. And it was the beginning, the first capital of Brazil. That's where the government started. So I'm talking about this because Bolsonaro, the actual Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, he is from Rio de Janeiro. And sometimes interests between these two towns kind of crash a little, collide, and so. But in the movie, that's the beginning of it. Most of it is taped in São Paulo, and then of course Brasilia, which is our capital since mid 60s. Um, I think Brazil is 60 or 65 years old, something like that. She talks about it in the movie. She shows the construction of Brasilia. And so we have these three areas, these three cities that are very representative. The, the dictatorship, the military dictatorship gave us Dilma Rousseff, which is the first Brazilian woman president that got impeached and is also represented in the movie, gave us Aécio Neves, that is the candidate that fought against Dilma and lost, and Juscelino Kubitschek, the president who built Brasilia. So even though Minas Gerais, it's another state, not São Paulo, not the state of Rio de Janeiro, the political contributions really travels around Brazil. I think this is important to acknowledge because we're talking about, the movie talks about power, decisions, sharing opportunities or not. And I like the perspective of the Petra, the author, because she's talking from her point of view and her life history. She grew up in a house that had a political view. I'm not talking about to this party or that other party, but it seems to me in her house, people talked about politics and educated themselves about politics. They were active. And that's why I guess she pursued the chance to develop this documentary because she had something to say. She was never elected for anything, nor her parents, but she had something to say, something to share with the Brazilian community. And I think she did a great job because she included herself in the movie, included her mother, that has very important comments and connections with the politicians. But she didn't show just one side. She tried to depict the whole history behind the scenes, in front of the cameras. because Brazil has a very powerful TV network that they 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 have all the equipment to do great footages, and they can be on the news all day long. It's like we have our own CNN through this TV channel. And well, it's a very recent story. And I was watching the movie and said, hey, I remember that. I remember that. I don't remember that, because she selected some points of view that were not highlighted on the Brazilian TV.
Can you name a couple of those off the top of your head? Maybe the one or two that you thought, oh, I don't remember that.
Yes, when Lula was about to leave to the airport, you can see it's the beginning, it's also the end of the movie. It's crowded there, crowded. And by the end, right before he left, he was talking and talking and talking. That's what the TV was showing. And I had the feeling, my God, he's just going, going. Where is he going with what he's saying? Because he looked like, I felt like he doesn't he doesn't know exactly what he's saying, you know. I felt he was just blah 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 endlessly. But she picked one part that I don't remember seeing on TV. Maybe they showed it. I was not all day watching it, but she picked the sentence that he said, it doesn't matter if I'm in jail. You are here. It doesn't matter if I'm done, if I die, or I there are a lot of Lulas in Brazil. There are a lot of women that knows what to do now. There are a lot of people that know what they want. So she highlighted that part, because sometimes if I compare with the American politicians, they even in the United States, they even publish the speeches. You know, people buy the speeches because they're so well constructed, so with a point, a message that you want to send. And in Brazil, sometimes you just feel like everybody's speaking at the same time. So you lose track of what's the message. But with that part, he gave a very clear message.
Did his did those statements from him at those moments, I guess in the film, since they weren't ones that you had remembered, did they feel hopeful to you? I kept wondering throughout the film, do I feel hopeful at this moment? And it kept changing. And I don't know enough to have an informed opinion about what I should feel, but just from the narrative that the film created, I'm wondering how it affected you about that feeling.
Yeah. At that moment when it was happening, I knew that Lula and the PT party would not really stand a chance. And they had no candidate. So nobody knew what to hope for. I think that's part of such involvement with him leaving. But watching the movie with that sentence made me hopeful now that there are people listening, there are people thinking. At the same time, I feel afraid. Because what are they going to do with these people? What's going to happen?
Yeah. I've gotten a little note here in the chat from one of the other Spurlock staff, Monica Scott, has kind of virtually raised her hand to chime in. Monica?
One second. There's a lot of things happening in my background, so I apologize. Outdoors, outside of the house, but your point about Lula's statements before he had to surrender himself to jail were so spot on. That's one of my favorite scenes in the film, because I thought the filmmaker, I thought Petra created this very poetic I don't know, like there's something very poetic about
Mhm.
how she found the right quotes and interspersed them throughout the film itself. And one of the ones I wrote down was, it's a paraphrase of what Lula said, but they can kill 100 flowers, but they can't stop the arrival of spring. And and he said our search is in, our fight is in search of spring. And I thought that was it was beautiful. And he had a very straightforward final statement before he went away to jail. And when Beth asked the question about hope, and I thought that was an interesting question too, because while I was looking at the faces of his supporters, the way they were blocking, trying to block him from being arrested, taken away, and the way that they were it was a very emotional, and I saw so much pain in their faces. And so for me, it wasn't as if, someone was being taken away and they will return soon. To me, it just seemed so much deeper. The pain, it seemed like they were really losing something. And I thought that they felt like the faces looked as if they were losing hope. And so it was interesting when we talk about hope, I felt like his words were speaking something and he was trying to speak that hope into people. And then their faces were looking like, oh my goodness, like, I don't know if I can depend on this. I don't know which direction to go in. So I just thought there was like a disparate sort of reaction between his words and the faces of the people.
One of the reasons I asked that is I was looking at a review of this film on NPR, and they brought up this theme. And I'll just share a quote from that review because it really struck me. And I apologize if I start to cry because it really was moving to me. The reviewer says, "For now, Brazil's democracy emerges as a bruised and battered adult. Costa herself is shaken, haunted by her family and country's past, more precisely how the few powerful families like hers dictate the country's fate. Nevertheless, a samba over the closing credits offers a cautiously upbeat tone and an ending that suggests, at least for now, that Brazilians have suffered too much, fought too hard to easily give up hope." And like, what a thought to have. I know the film was not made for 2020 and 2021, but I think what a great time to be watching this film and thinking about it. I really felt that. And Walenia, please correct me. I think I read just today that Lula is now out of prison and has had his full political rights returned to him and all charges against him overturned by the Supreme Court. Is that right?
Exactly. And today they were judging the judge that condemned him. They were considering him not high enough in the court power to persecute him, and he acted on his own interest. But there's a lot of things behind this, a lot. So just adding that to the hope.
Yeah.
One thing that she did not show in the movie was that, of course, when he tried to go away, Lula tried to go to the airport the first time. They blocked the gates and didn't let him go out. So that was the first attempt. And people were so agitated because in the movie he said, "I'm going to go because I'm not going to give them a chance to say this and this." So he went back inside. He went up in the building and talked to people again, say, "Calm down. I have to go. I'm sorry. I understand you, but please calm down. You're going to hurt yourself." So he had to go up and tell people to calm down. Because Lula is extremely charismatic. If you like him or not, he made Brazil well known all over the world. There's a very short scene that Obama goes to shake his hand. So it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And what we have right now is the opposite of it in relation to contact with people, but for half of the Brazilian population, because the other half of Brazilian population is going on bike rides with Bolsonaro, all happy with flags, taking pictures with him. So Lula is very charismatic. And the problem with the hope is when the standard of being charismatic and loved and whatever or hated, it's up here. Who is gonna be able to follow that? And that's part of the problem with Dilma. And she said that on the movie. She said she was not expecting to be the president. And Lula picked her, and she had no say in that. And then through the movie, you can see that a woman in the Congress and the Senate full of men. And so I would like to say one little thing here, because the movie made me think about it, and I start researching. It was a princess that signed the gave freedom to the Brazilian slaves in 1888. Princess Isabel. At that time, she was the queen of Brazil because her father, the king, was traveling in Europe. And when he came back, that's when Brazil became a republic, 1 year after the abolition. So I said, wow, they kicked her out, just like they did to Dilma. Because, and it was the militaries that ended monarchy in Brazil and started the Republica. And then, wait, now they took Dilma out, and then is a leader that has a military background. Oh, it's funny how things,
Yeah.
it's because they were women.
Yeah.
There is there a sort of problem with that? They can't obey. I don't know.
Monica, jump in.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because one of the quotes from Petra again was, our country, what did I just lost it. Oh yeah, our democracy was founded on forgetting. And I thought that was very interesting, because she was, sort of laying out this, like outlining all of the things that shaped the country and all of the lessons learned, and then all of the lessons forgotten. And so I just really thought, that connected with what you were saying. It really is just sort of this full circle moment of history that's happening there. And also so many things in the film just reminded me of the United States. As soon as something happened, I would be like, oh yeah, well, this looks very familiar. This seems very familiar, including the impeachment. Yeah. And when the film progressed and they started talking about the prosecution's case, and basically like Lula was being indicted because of an apartment that they didn't even have proof that he had ownership over. And it was like, but they were finding things, and the narrator did a pretty interesting job of sort of highlighting that, or highlighting the grasping of the prosecution at, just trying to find some sort of way to thread Lula with this situation. I thought that was very interesting. It reminded me in some ways of Clinton's impeachment, maybe, as well as Benghazi, because it's this sort of, this thing happened, and now in order to really remove this person, we have to exaggerate the situation and make it bigger than life. And then, I cannot express to you how much it just reminded me of the US Congress, especially their failure to investigate Telma, what's his name? Telma?
Juma.
No, Juma. Not Juma. The vice president of Juma.
Oh, Temer. Michel
Temer. Yes, Michel Temer. they didn't want to investigate him after
No.
pushing hard for an investigation of Juma. So I was like, this looks familiar still.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in I don't know, like what I want to say, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like who is rubbing off on whom, or who is inspiring what, if that's even a thing international? Like how are all of these things linked?
Mhm.
These ideologies, these political views.
Well, I have to say one thing. I think Brazilians are very intense, very intense. They love and hate. You can see that on the video, the way they verbalize some things. And when Lula was elected the first time, I was a student at the University of Illinois, and Fernando Henrique Cardoso was the president, and he was trying to improve the country. Of course, they all tried to do it, but he started making a lot of mistakes, against the population. He cut my paycheck once for a month,
Mm.
just because he said people were not doing whatever. So Lula it was his third attempt to win, and he won
Mm.
because I think the population was enough with Fernando Henrique Cardoso. Anybody except him, whoever is the candidate except him. And when he was elected for the first time, like I said, I was in the United States, and my sister videotaped on the VHS tape. She said, "You had to see what happens on the street. You had, I taped it to show you. People had him on his shoulders. People were jumping on him." And I was, because at that time, I was against Fernando Henrique, but I really didn't care who was gonna. I just want somebody else. And I have the feeling that this happened again when people got tired of PT. Whoever is the candidate, we have to take them out. And when Lula was arrested and could not be a candidate, there was that problem again that happened with Dilma. Who is going to be his successor? And he chose Haddad, who was his minister of education. He's a professor, and he was a great, in my opinion, as a professor, he was a great minister of education. Made mistakes, yes, you know, like everybody, but he was not a very good mayor in São Paulo. And then we go back again. If you were good in São Paulo, you may win the elections, because São Paulo has more than 11 million inhabitants, and it's huge. So it's a very important. Um, and then they picked Haddad and picked Manuela, a young woman. She's on the video. She's behind Lula, black hair, white shirt, and she is openly against, in favor of abortion. So for some people that made it, not like in PT anymore. It was 12 years, 16 years of PT. Temer, all covered up by his buddies in the Congress with his, and so they didn't have a chance. Whoever was the other candidate. The important thing that she showed on the movie is that Bolsonaro was aware, in my opinion, okay, that he saw a chance there. When Temer was the president, there was a group of people that invaded the Congress, and they were claiming for military power again.
Mm.
So when you added up on the timeline, all the information, it's like it has been going on a long time ago. Lula was a candidate 3 times. That means 8 years before he was elected. So it does take time for the things to go. My family, most of my family is Bolsonaro. They voted for Bolsonaro. And even today, part of my family defends Bolsonaro. They don't see any problem in what's going on, even though I lost a brother with COVID.
Mm.
So that's Brazil right now.
Yeah.
Everybody has their preferences, and they can justify this or that. But in the movie, I think Dilma says one thing very important: how the Congress voted against her, and they all would go there and shout on the microphone things about family. That was not even part of the discussion. Of course, for my family.
Mm.
And then when it's about Tamer, you can see that on the movie too. They're calmer, and they say, no, no, it's not good to move a president again. Let's let him quiet there.
Ugh.
So who is in the power? And Juma said that we didn't vote for the majority in the Congress. We didn't vote for the majority in the Senate. So we were walking alone, and people were walking in another direction.
Mm. Could you talk a little bit about the, I'll use the word relationship, please substitute another one, between Juma and Temer, because in the film you see when there's footage of them, he's always standing very far away from her or walking far behind. And it was such an interesting contrast to the imagery you often see of the US president and vice president when they're actually in the same place at the same time. But even at was it inauguration that they showed where they don't
Yes.
seem like they have anything to do with one another. And of course, then as it plays out, that obviously she chose those clips on purpose. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about their pairing as a political entity or as political companions.
If I'm not mistaken, he was the leader of his party at that time, PMDB. And it's an old party in Brazil, very established, has a long history, wins in a lot of states, powerful. And as she mentions in the movie, PT had to start to make alliances with other parties in order to survive. And they negotiated that with him. But I don't know if he ever felt comfortable with being part of it or not.
He doesn't look it, does he, in the film?
Yeah, I think he was just waiting for a chance to shine. And he shook hands with Aécio Neves. And I'm going to say here in public, Aécio Neves was the governor of the state of Minas Gerais. And when Dilma was running for the first time, and he did a great job. Belo Horizonte is a big city, 3 million inhabitants. And he organized the police, he cleaned the streets, he did a good job, from what I could see. He was pictured in the cover of one Brazilian magazine, like Superman, ripping his shirt and the superpower, because he was doing a lot of things that looked great, paid the state bills, no debts. But his party did not select him to run against Dilma. They select the president of the party, who was governor in São Paulo. And he is the same guy who lost to Lula on the Lula second time, José Serra. So he had to wait 4 years. And waiting this 4 years, a lot of things came up. How he got the money to pay the state's debt. What did he do? He raised state taxes, for example, that really hurt the local business and things like that. That you don't talk about it before being elected, right? and then when Temer is nominated, because they got rid of Dilma, he's there shaking hands with Aécio Neves. So there's a lot of behind the scenes that we just don't know. We don't know.
I want to share another quote from a different review that really spoke to me, and I'd be interested in your reaction. And Monica, and to our attendees, a couple folks have popped in since we started, and if you would like to comment please raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Everyone in this audience is from Amazon. You all know each other, so it is not scary. This is from, let me see. Oh, I'm sorry. This is also from NPR. And it's talking about, for those who haven't seen the film, there are many, many instances of drone footage used in the film where the camera is just gliding, soaring, floating over a big park or public space in front of the Parliament building or the Congress building in Brasilia, and then also through the president's house, right?
Yes.
And that is very interesting footage for those who are not familiar with this building, which I was not. It's a modernist masterpiece. It's, this glorious mid-century architecture by, I'm forgetting his name, but a world famous architect.
Oscar Niemeyer.
Thank you. He's done many things that you will recognize. And the way that there is often no voiceover during this footage, sometimes there is, but often there's music, but it's otherwise silent. And it's very eerie. And the NPR reviewer refers to it as if in a ghost story. These empty rooms gliding along slowly through darkened interiors is a poignant metaphor, as one by one inhabitants are pushed off the political stage, and it seems the filmmaker is maybe falling as well. And it did have that sort of, when the camera's floating, you feel like it is going to fall to earth at some point. And it did happen many times that these, that people are toppled, which is a real contrast to maybe any sort of sense of hope that that the film has. But I'd love your reaction to how those drone shots were used, or any of the kinds of shots and clips that were there.
Yeah, I think she did a good job for people who doesn't know Brasilia, and how beautiful it is, how rich it is, modern. And she also did a shot of two signs that are posted there that highlights how they got financial contribution from companies, from construction companies that funded the remodeling, because Brasilia was built, but then there was no remodeling. 50 years passed, 60 years passed, and there's a lot of artwork from Brazilian painters, and you can see some sculptures inside. So it's a good tour. If you go to Brasilia one day, you're gonna see the bus goes around it, and that's that empty area. That's where people gather to the inauguration or to protest against.
They had such great contrast, didn't they? Because it was wronged and protest there, and then you see shots of police with, I'm forgetting what kind of weapons were there, or sort of, did people have firecrackers or something? I'm not remembering, but, and then you see it utterly placid in these other shots, and those contrasts are great. Monica has her hand up again. Jump in, Monica.
Yeah, like I noticed so many contrasts in the film. I think she did a really fantastic job showing contrast. I think that she was able to weave throughout the narrative, because one that I noted was there was like a visual shift at some point in the film. Oh, I noted it was like the 43-minute mark. It was pro-Lula people and anti-Lula people, and there was like this stark contrast. The pro-Lula, it was bright. It was during the day. There were people, a diversity of people. And then the anti, I think, was filmed at night, and people were wearing dark colors. So she used a lot of visuals to actually share the story too, like these visual cues or tools to create this narrative as well. She was able to do that very, very well. So even if you watch the film without a point of view, I think you could lean into one based on how she pulled together all of the imagery.
Very much.
Yes, and also she let people talk. She doesn't have to say anything. People start shouting and being aggressive, and she let them be, because what that was perfect. I think this means she's a very good director, and attentive to what's going on, and Wow, it's intense.
I was appreciative of the way she brought in her personal history, partly just because it's interesting to know who the director is, but also because of her family. Again, for those who haven't seen the film, her family made its money by construction companies, the kind that are implicated in the Operation Car Wash, is it? The scandals of corruption.
Yes.
But her parents were guerrilla fighters in the 60s and 70s. So she has these wildly disparate factors in her family. And Walenia, it reminded me of when you were talking about your own family and their current political leanings despite things that have happened. Monica, do you want to pop back in?
Yeah, one of the things I noted too, and I'm glad was mentioned, was the fact that she let so many people talk, and she let people tell, she let these voices speak for themselves. There was this one scene where when Juma's was being removed from the presidential house, they showed people moving, they showed people cleaning, and there were two ladies on the stairs cleaning the stairs. And the one lady who was speaking, what I appreciated about her interview was the fact that she started speaking, and I could tell that she was working, her brain was working through what she was saying, and it was sort of coming into realizations as she continued to speak. She was like, well, like one point she was like, well, I guess all of these people wanted her out, she deserved to leave. And then as she kept speaking, she was like, but we didn't have anything to do with that. The voters didn't have an opportunity to actually affect that change. And so it was like her, head was spinning, and you could see sort of this movement of, oh my goodness, how did we get here? Or like this realization that sort of came to her as she kept talking. And I enjoyed that just as much as I was annoyed by this one gentleman in the film who was, yes, he was so celebratory for Lula going to prison. I hope he dies there. And I'm like, what? For accepting an apartment? Like, seriously, like that's what he's being accused of. I thought it was so dramatic. And, but again, these are people who have, their voices were being included in this narrative. So
yes, and the cleaning lady there, she was very calm, and she could express her doubt. And the other guy, it looks like, if I don't shout and slap your face, I haven't expressed my. But it's interesting. In Brazil we have a lot of WhatsApp groups, and I have from my family, my cousins, and I was on the verge of quitting everything because people start posting political jokes, and that makes me feel so bad. I haven't been able to watch TV, the news recently, because it's horrible. It's horrible. The feeling it puts on me, because everything now is violent. It's invasive. It's disrespectful. It looks like people lost track how to talk. How can you express your opinion? And people are getting hurt. One person lost his vision in one eye because of a rubber bullet. So it's becoming intense in a bad way. And I come from a family. I was born in 66. The military started in 64, and my father always told me, my whole family, don't get involved in anything. Don't, because he was an adult during the dictatorship. And he knew what was going to happen. It could be arrested, it could disappear. And it was not just in Brazil, Argentina, Chile. So he always told us, don't get involved in anything, don't express your opinion, don't go in conflicts, don't go to manifestations. And in the Juma's government, the second one before she was impeached, she shows that in the movie too. It was when the World Cup was coming to Brazil, and they start remodeling the stadiums. Belo Horizonte became violent. There was a car conversion that was inviting people, come to the street, come to the street. They had to take that commercial out because that slogan became, the attitude of going to the street and destroying everything. And in Brazil or any country, you don't have money to build one thing and destroy it, like bus stops, light traffic for the traffic, and they destroyed everything downtown. And they came walking towards the stadium and destroying the stores, car dealers.
Mm.
So every time the car dealers start putting planks on the windows to avoid, they destroyed the cars inside. So what I'm saying is that's why she did a good job with the movie. You have to look on both sides, both sides. The violence was there already, and it's becoming more intense. So that's frightening.
There was another person who appeared very briefly in the film I wanted to ask you about. Simply, he caught my attention for some reason. And in doing some reading today, I learned he's also the subject of a documentary, and that is Jean Willis. Is that his name? The first openly gay activist MP in Brazil who was elected, but then stepped down because he did not want to live under the security protection he needed because of threats against him, including from Bolsonaro.
Yes,
who,
yes.
Did I see correctly that one of them spat at the other in Congress or something like that? Like,
yes,
this man is clearly very much under attack, and I think one can only support his decision to leave.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to tell you a little bit of his
Please.
history. He is from a small town in the Northeast, and he was a candidate for Big Brother, that show, that TV show.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. My sister told me that. The whole gay community organized to vote on him. So he won. After that, the TV started changing the rules of voting. And he was the last one. So he voted and he won 1 million reais. And he used that money with the support of other gay committees and to be elected. And he was elected. His first election, he was there. And he shows up in the movie with a red scarf.
Yeah.
And he's talking in favor of Dilma. And he's trying to make sense. Like, people, what you're doing, what you're saying here doesn't. And then after Bolsonaro was elected, he started getting life threats. So he quit, and he's not living in Brazil right now because of homophobics and all the fake news against him.
Yeah.
And he decided it was too much for him.
Yeah, understandably.
Yeah.
Monica, leap in.
I am so glad you brought him up, Beth, because I had my notes. One of the things that was kind of unfortunate about the film is that as people were speaking in Congress, the filmmaker didn't include their names ahead of time, so I couldn't pinpoint who they were, and I really wanted to know who he was.
Yeah, he's very
compelling on the
screen.
I put in my notes, like, he went completely off. I loved it. I loved what he said. He had so much passion, and I just wanted to know who he was. So I'm glad that Beth was able to find out.
Yeah.
Because then it added more questions. So now I have a little bit more context, because I was like, who is this? Who is this? Who is he representing? What party is he from? I was trying to figure out what role he played, because the Congress hated him.
Yeah.
Because they booed everything he said. And I was like, but this guy, he's bringing it. I appreciate it. So yeah. Thank you for sharing his name and information.
Usually I'm a little skeptical of reality TV stars who go on to be politicians, but he was the way it was edited into this film, he was very compelling. And he seems young, exciting, energetic, was shouting against the villains of this piece, you know. So he was an exciting character when he was on screen.
And the other character was a Black woman. She has been a politician for a long time. She's well known. She's from Rio de Janeiro. And then Bolsonaro is kind of doing this in front of her face. I was, wow, you know?
It reminded me of in British Parliament when they start screaming at each other, and, you know, it's like that.
That's not necessary. You know, it's embarrassing you know, it's just embarrassing.
It was so, and that is one of the points in which, you know, it compares so easily to what American politics is like. I mean, you know, lots of people's politics have always been rowdy, but just the lack of respect, even at the very most basic level, for civility of people doing their professionals trying to do their job, you know, like it's very resonant.
And when Lula was arrested, again, I didn't know what to think at that time, but I just thought it was so sad that a president that represented Brazil so well ended up going to jail. You know, I just felt, how come? Because, you know, everybody can make mistakes. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but the way I was brought up, that would be so embarrassed, you know. And but then you look at behind the scenes, and of course, well,
Walenia, can I ask you, and maybe this could be a closing point if we want it to be, or we can continue as well. With Lula having been released from prison and these charges all dropped against him, what do you think he might do next, or would you like him to do next? My understanding is he cannot run for president again. Is that correct?
Well, he can run again, but he is 75 years old.
Okay.
You know, and I don't think he can do it alone. He's gonna have to find somebody to be his second that will bring votes. There are some traditional politics, including the one that Lula won over him, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, that he said in public, I'm gonna vote for whoever my party takes, but if the person from my party is not able to go to the second round, I'm gonna vote in anyone against Bolsonaro, any candidate. So now I think the opposition has to find somebody that can go against him. And so it's a big question mark right now, at least for me.
Is the next election next year?
October 22.
22.
Yeah. Yes.
Monica is reminding us in the chat of a line from the film that I know our attendees will resonate with. Democracy is only working when the rich feel threatened. That's just a fantastic line. It really speaks to the world's largest democracies of India, Brazil, the US. We're all going through the same, very similar things right now. I mean, obviously playing out with lots of local variation, but these right-wing populist fascist leaning or just plain fascist movements that are in all three of these countries and others as well are not threatening the rich. And so this sums it up very nicely, or at least parts of it. I know it's not the whole thing, but
yeah, I just feel, just to close, that
sure.
Just looking, I'm sorry to say that, but looking nice in front of the camera is not enough.
Totally.
I think presidents all over the world lost their power. And I don't even know what I'm calling power, but maybe to make good decisions in favor of the people. But there are so many subdivisions that you may be the leader, but you ended up powerless unless you do certain things that we have been seeing going on in South America.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
That's a fabulous closing thought. Thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you, Walenia, so much for sharing your perspective and your thoughts on a film that I know you have not lived in Brazil the whole time that this film covers, and I really appreciate your perspective as someone who is used to talking to Americans about Brazil and can tell us about it, but also your own thoughts as a person who is engaged with with progress, with learning, with those aspects of politics as well. I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If anyone wants to talk about another movie next week at this same time at 7 o'clock, we're looking at an Indian film about the Indian freedom struggle against the British in the 1930s and 40s. It's called The Legend of Bhagat Singh. It too is available on Netflix. It is a more typical Bollywood movie, so there are musical sequences for my choir friends here in the audience this evening. And we have a guest joining us who is a scholar of Indian film and music from Arizona State University. And we just, again, really thank Walenia for sharing her thoughts with us and her time with us this evening. And this will be up on Facebook and the museum's YouTube if you want to go back to it. Maybe get your friends to watch this movie. It is fantastic, and I'm so glad to have gotten to see it and talk about it with you all. Thanks very much. Good night, everyone.